Welcome back. Today it's syntax. So we're moving up a level on our ladder. We're moving up on our levels of linguistic analysis. We're done with the structure of words. Now we're going to be looking at syntax, which is the structure of sentences, how sentences are formed out of words in the same way that words are formed out of morphemes. So syntax is the study of the structure of sentences. We saw previously that we had these things called phonemes, which combine together to form morphemes. We saw that morphemes combine together to form words. And what we're going to be doing now is thinking about how words combine together to form sentences. And it's not so simple. It's not just that you can string together any old set of words and expect to get a sentence. In fact, there are incredibly complex and interesting constraints on how words combine together to form sentences in a natural language. A sentence is something that expresses a complete meaning. And we can contrast that with the ways that our previous notions of phoneme and morpheme connected with this idea of meaning. So a phoneme has no intrinsic meaning. So like the phoneme k, well, you use it to distinguish one word from another, but it doesn't mean anything, right? So k, if I just say k, it doesn't mean anything. A morpheme was the smallest identifiable unit that expressed a meaning at all. So like cat has a particular meaning, it's a morpheme, and it can't be analyzed into any smaller parts. A sentence is something that expresses a complete meaning, a complete thought. So let's think in a more quantitative way about this sort of hierarchy of levels of linguistic analysis. When we were talking about phonemes, we saw that on average, languages typically have around 25 distinct phonemes, 25 different contrastive sounds that contrast with each other in order to distinguish morphemes. And typically languages have somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 different morphemes. Now, here's a question. How many different sentences are there in a language? How many different possible sentences are there in, say, English? So English has about, as an educated adult speaker of English, you know something like 50,000 words. How many sentences are there in English? Can you think of a number? Is it like 1 million or 1 billion? It's actually unlimited. There is an unlimited number of sentences in English and in any language. So we also saw that in morphology, morphemes, the meanings of morphemes had to be memorized because morphemes formed their meanings arbitrarily. Remember the arbitrariness of the sign. The meaning of a morpheme is just something you have to learn. You can't look at the word cat and analyze it into parts to figure out that it refers to the feline creatures. It's just something you have to memorize. So as a speaker of English, you have memorized about 50,000 different words and their meanings. So that means, like, if you've never heard a morpheme before, like some nonce morpheme like wug, you can't figure out what it means by looking at its parts, right? Remember, morpheme is the smallest identifiable unit of meaning, so that means the parts don't give you any clues about what the meaning is. Whereas when we get to thinking about sentences, the meaning of every sentence is predictable given the parts. That's why we can have an unlimited number of sentences, because even if it's a sentence you've never heard before, you can figure out what it means by looking at the parts. So you've probably never heard the sentence, "My hovercraft is full of eels," before, unless you've seen a certain Monty Python sketch. But you still understand what it means. This is something that even if you've never heard it before, you still know what it means, like when this fellow says it. So how is this possible? How is it that you can understand the meaning of something that you've never heard before? It's because sentences follow what's called the principle of compositionality. The principle of compositionality means that the meaning of the whole is the meaning of the parts plus how they're combined. So here's an example. Here's a particular form, a sentence in the English language. The cat sat on the mat. Now, if you've never heard this before, you can still understand it. And that's because the parts of the sentence correspond to parts of the meaning in a systematic way, and that's compositionality. So this is the meaning. You have this furry feline creature sitting on a soft thing. And the way you can figure out that meaning from the form is that there's this regular correspondence where a sequence of phonemes like the cat corresponds to the meaning having this feline creature in it. And the sequence of phonemes on the mat, that corresponds to the meaning having this soft object in it. And the part, the word sat, indicates the kind of action, the relationship that holds in this case between the cat and the mat. So if you know the meanings of the parts, and you know how to combine the meanings of the parts to form the whole, then you can understand what this sentence means even if you've never heard it before. And that's the principle of compositionality. So what are those parts? Those are what we call syntactic categories. And what are the ways those parts are combined? Those are what we call syntactic rules, which we're going to get to in the next lecture, but we're going to be building up to today. So the first thing to note about syntax is that of the possible combinations of words, of all the ways you could string words together, only a few of those actually form meaningful sentences in any given language. At this point, we need to pause and think about this notion of grammar, which I've talked about before. But when we get to syntax, it becomes especially important to interrogate this notion a bit further. So in syntax, we're going to be categorizing certain sequences of words as either grammatical or ungrammatical within a language. And what we mean by that is that a certain sequence of words follows a mental grammar. A mental grammar is a speaker, like a speaker's unconscious knowledge of how a language works. So when you know a language, you have a massive unconscious body of knowledge in your mind, in your brain, which is your knowledge of how the language works. And that is the mental grammar. When you know a language, you know its rules. You know the phonological rules, you know the morphological processes, and you know the syntactic rules, which we're going to be talking about. So unconsciously in your mind, you have phonological rules like this. Now, they're not written like this in your mind. This is just a way of writing these things down that linguists invented. It's a notation that lets us write this down as scientists. But you, as a speaker of English or a speaker of whatever language, you already unconsciously know these phonological rules. That's part of what you know when you know a language. You also know morphological processes, so you know that you can add a "de" at the end of a word in English to form the past tense. Even if no one ever taught you that explicitly, you still know it implicitly, unconsciously. And you also have knowledge of syntactic rules. That's going to be one of the components of your mental grammar, your unconscious knowledge of how a language works. So a sentence is grammatical in a language if it follows the rules of the mental grammar of that language, which means that it accords with the rules that you know already unconsciously. And a sentence is ungrammatical if it breaks those rules, which is to say, if it's something that people in a language would not say. So for example, this sentence, "My hovercraft is full of eels." Now, the meaning here is crazy. It's hard to think of a scenario where you would really say something like this and mean it. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that it follows the rules of your mental grammar. So there is a possible situation where someone would say this. It's a crazy situation, that doesn't matter. What matters is there is a situation where an English speaker would say this and would be understood. So we say this is grammatical. Now, what's an example of an ungrammatical sequence of words? That would be something like this. "Hovercraft of full eels my is." Do you see how this just doesn't sort of hang together? This is ungrammatical. This is a random sequence of words. An English speaker would never say this, no matter how crazy the context, and an English speaker would not understand what is meant by this. I don't even understand what this is supposed to mean. So this is ungrammatical. Something is grammatical if it follows the rules that you unconsciously know as a speaker of a language. It's ungrammatical if it breaks those rules. And we mark ungrammatical sentences in syntax with a star, like this. So the star is a way for us to indicate a sequence of words which is actually ungrammatical in a language. And so we're going to be doing a lot of exercises and examples in this lecture of looking at sequences of words and figuring out, are they grammatical or ungrammatical? In English, do they get the star or not? Now I'd like to remind you of the distinction between prescriptive and descriptive grammar. When you learned what was called grammar in school, you might have learned things like don't end a sentence with a preposition, or don't use passive voice, these kinds of things you read in a book like Strunk and White. Or don't use the word less with a count noun, like less customers, you should say fewer customers. That is all prescriptive grammar. Prescriptive grammar is someone's ideas about what makes for correct or good writing. Prescriptive grammar is telling you what you should do. That's not our business. As scientists, we're trying to scientifically understand language as it actually is used, not as someone thinks it should be used. So we're interested in descriptive grammar. Whenever I say grammatical, I mean descriptively grammatical. Descriptive grammar is a description of the rules that people actually do follow in a speech community in normal language use. So a sentence is grammatical in a language if it follows the rules in the mental grammar, meaning your unconscious knowledge. It's ungrammatical if it breaks those rules, which is to say it's something that people would not say. There is no circumstance in which this would be a coherent sentence in the language. When we're studying syntax, we're going to be relying a lot on grammaticality judgments. That means that you get a speaker's intuitive judgment about whether a sentence is grammatical or not. And it's worthwhile to pause and think about why we have to use grammaticality judgments when we're studying syntax. When we were studying phonology and morphology, I gave you these data sets. I gave you these lists of words. But that kind of thing can't work in syntax because remember, in syntax, there's an infinite, unbounded number of possible sentences. I can't possibly give you a list of all the sentences. So in syntax, we have to rely on speakers' intuitive judgments about whether something is grammatical or not. So when you're doing syntax problems, you're going to have to think, is this sentence grammatical or not? Relying on your own intuition and your own knowledge of the language. If a sentence is grammatical, we also call it well-formed. Otherwise, it's ill-formed. I'd like to emphasize again that grammaticality is separate from whether a sentence is plausible. It has nothing to do with whether a sentence is likely or unlikely. It doesn't matter if a sentence is nonsensical or false. All that matters is that it follows the rules of the language. So here's an example sentence. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Is this grammatical or not? Well, yes, it's grammatical. It's hard to think of a context where you would say this, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that it follows the rules of the language. There is a possible context where you might say this. Here's a little illustration of colorless green ideas sleeping furiously. You might get an image like this in your mind when you read this sentence. So it is in fact a grammatical sentence. It does express a meaning, even though it's a somewhat crazy meaning. Whereas this is an ungrammatical sentence. Colorless, sleep, green, sleep, colorless, furiously ideas. It's hard to even read it, right? This is sort of a jumble of words that don't form a sentence together. This is ungrammatical. Sometimes we call something like this word salad. So it gets the star. So green, sleep, colorless, furiously ideas doesn't follow the rules of the English language. It's ungrammatical. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously is grammatical because even though the meaning is far-fetched, it does follow the rules of the language. And that means we could come up with a context where we might say it. So this is a little story here. There was actually a big contest at Stanford University in the 90s where people tried to write stories that would actually include the sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. It's a famous sentence within linguistics. So here's one that someone came up with. I have a friend who's always full of ideas, good ideas and bad ideas, fine ideas and crude ideas, old ideas and new ideas. Before putting his new ideas into practice, he usually sleeps them over to let them mature and ripen. However, when he's in a hurry, he sometimes puts his ideas into practice before they're quite ripe, or in other words, while they're still green. Some of his green ideas are quite lively and colorful, but not always, some being quite plain and colorless. When he remembers that some of his colorless ideas are still too green to use, he will sleep over them, or let them sleep as he puts it, But some of those ideas may be mutually conflicting and contradictory, and when they sleep together on the same night, they get into furious fights and turn the sleep into a nightmare. Thus, my friend often complains that his colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So you see that we are able to construct a sort of far-fetched context in which this sentence is okay. But for the ungrammatical sentence, for the word salad thing, there is no context you could ever create that would make that okay. So a sentence is grammatical when it's something someone would say no matter how unlikely the context. Let's do some more examples. I bought a dog. Is this grammatical or not? So if you're following along at home, you should think, is it thumbs up grammatical or is it thumbs down ungrammatical? I bought a dog. Is this something an English speaker would say? Yeah, it's grammatical. No problem. How about this? Me bought a dog. Me bought a dog. Is this grammatical English? It's going to get a thumbs down. So that's ungrammatical. And it gets the star. How about this? Sally ate an apple. Now you think, you read it, it sounds perfectly fluent, you get a coherent meaning out of it, so this follows the rules of the English language, and it gets a check, it's grammatical. Sally ate a treat. Is this grammatical? Well, it's pretty far-fetched, but it does follow the rules of the language. Like, this could be, if Sally is a big monster like Godzilla, it's not far-fetched that Sally might eat a tree. So, Sally ate a tree is grammatical in English. How about this? Sally a tree ate. Now this doesn't sound like English. This seems just like a bunch of words that have been jammed together, right? So that's ungrammatical and it gets the star. Sally ate and exploded. Now this one you're kind of like, if you hear Sally ate and exploded, you're kind of waiting for more, right? You're waiting to hear, what is the noun here? When you hear this, you think the sentence isn't complete. So this is ungrammatical as a sentence. Sally ate and exploded. That's not something that you would say under any circumstance. It violates the rules that you have in your mental grammar of English. Sally likes Bob. Grammatical or not? It's grammatical, pretty straightforward. Bob likes Sally. Grammatical. Likes Sally Bob. Would you ever say this? No. So this is ungrammatical in English and it gets the star. What this is showing us is that the order of the words is important. So in English, we like to put the subject, Sally, before the verb, likes, and then the verb likes goes before the object, Bob. But we don't like to put the verb first. So likes Sally Bob doesn't work in English. How about this? Sally will go to a store. Grammatical or not? Well, it's grammatical. Pretty simple. Sally has go to a store. Nope, doesn't quite work. Sally has go to a store. There's a problem here where the verb would need to be in a different form. So when you have a context like Sally has blank to a store, the verb that goes there has to be in a particular morphological form. And this is not it. So Sally has go to a store doesn't work. What this shows is that whether or not a sentence is well formed depends not only on the order of the words, it depends on the form of the words. Depends on what the words are. So this gets a star. Sally has gone to a store, that would be grammatical. And this, store Sally gone to has, that's another sort of word salad. So that is ungrammatical. Even though it does have the right form of the verb, the order of the words is all wrong. And so that's ungrammatical in English. How about this? France is in Europe. Is this grammatical? Yes. No problem. France are in Europe. Nope. So France, that's a singular subject, and then are, that indicates the third person plural of the verb to be. And so there's a mismatch, and so this is ungrammatical. This is not something an English speaker would say. How about this? France is in Africa. Is this grammatical? Oh yeah, it's grammatical. It's wrong, it's false, but it is grammatical. It follows the rules of the language. How about this? The dog is mine. Is this grammatical? This dog is mine. Yes. This dog is my. This is another one where if someone said this dog is my, you're sort of waiting for the next word, right? The sentence is incomplete. So this is ungrammatical. It gets the star. This is my dog. That's fine. So we see that this word, my and mine, it has to change its form depending on the context it's in. This is an example of a syntactic constraint. How about this is mine dog? That one doesn't work. Not grammatical. And it gets the star. Sally ate the food. Grammatical or not? It's grammatical, no problem. Sally ate. Sure, yeah. Sally sat down and Sally ate. It's grammatical. Sally put the cup on the table. That's grammatical. But how about this? Sally put. That's ungrammatical. When you just hear Sally put, you're waiting to hear what she put and where she put it. So what this shows is that the presence of a word like put actually requires the presence of certain following words indicating what was put and where it was put. And that shows that there are what are called co-occurrence constraints, when you have certain words that requires the presence of other words in order to form a well-formed sentence. That's enough examples. Now let's get down to some analysis. I'm going to introduce this idea of syntactic categories. So when we want to describe these sequences of words, and we want to describe what makes some sequences grammatical and other ones ungrammatical, we're going to have to use these units called syntactic categories. Now I'm going to give you a preliminary definition of syntactic category here. Later in this unit, I'm going to give you the full definition. This is the preliminary provisional definition we're just going to be using in this lecture. We're going to use this to sort of build up the idea of syntactic category, and then we're going to have a more complete definition later. So two words are in different syntactic categories if and only if you can find a sentence where interchanging them makes a grammatical sentence ungrammatical. So it's a bit of a mouthful, so it's a lot easier to explain that with examples. So if you can interchange two words, then maybe they are in the same syntactic category. And if you can't interchange the two words, that means they're definitely in different syntactic categories. So here's an example. Are cat and explode, two words, in the same syntactic category? So step one of this test is you find a grammatical sentence that contains the word cat. All right? So let's have like, I saw the cat. That's grammatical. And now we want to interchange the word cat with the word explode. And we're going to see, does that make the sentence ungrammatical? So I saw the cat is grammatical. Try substituting explode instead of cat. You get I saw the explode. Nope, not grammatical. Doesn't work. Gets the star. So therefore, we've concluded that the word cat and the word explode are in different syntactic categories. Interesting, huh? So in fact, we can label the category of cat noun, and we can label the category of explode verb. These are labels of syntactic categories. Now, how about this one? Cat and mouse. Are cat and mouse in the same syntactic category? Let's take a look. Find a grammatical sentence containing the word cat, like I saw the cat. See if you can substitute mouse, and you ask, is the resulting sentence grammatical? So I saw the mouse, no problem. It's grammatical. Now, can you think of any examples where it doesn't work? So if you're following along at home, try to do this. So I saw the cat, I saw the mouse. Find a sentence that has cat in it. Try dropping in mouse instead of cat, and ask yourself, is the resulting sentence ungrammatical? So it might take a few minutes. You should go through a few examples in your head. If you can find any counterexamples, leave them in the comments below here. So we have, I saw, maybe we have something like the cat meowed, and we can drop in mouse and get the mouse meowed, and it's nonsensical, but it's grammatical. Let's see, we could have like, the cat is cute, drop in mouse, we get the mouse is cute. And pretty much you're going to find that these words are interchangeable, so they're in the same syntactic category. When you substitute one for the other, the sentence remains grammatical. They're both nouns. And the abbreviation we use for the syntactic category of nouns is N. So these are both N's. How about this? My and thee. Are my and thee in the same syntactic category? So how do we do this? Well, we find a grammatical sentence containing my, like hand me my phone, and it's grammatical. Try substituting thee instead of my, and you get hand me thee phone. Still grammatical. So, for those of you following along at home, go through a few examples in your head. Start with a sentence that contains my, then try dropping in thee, and ask yourself, does the sentence become ungrammatical? Try it out. So, in this case, it was grammatical. Can you find an example where it doesn't work? Now, if there are none, it's in the same category. Now, typically, when I teach this class in person, typically there's hundreds of people in the room, and there's usually one person who can actually come up with a counterexample for this. So if you do think of it, leave it in the comments. But it's really hard to come up with the counterexample. Most of the time when you substitute these two words, one for the other, it remains grammatical. For now, we're going to say they're in the same syntactic category. And we're going to say they're both in this category called determiners, for which the abbreviation is det. So later, when we get to the more complete definition of syntactic category, we're going to see that these are indeed in the same syntactic category. Now, how about the word thee and the word blue? Are the word thee and the word blue in the same syntactic category? We'll do our test. So we find a grammatical sentence that contains thee, like I like the salt. Now we try substituting blue instead of thee, and we get I like blue salt. Still grammatical, right? So, blue salt, what is that? I guess maybe that's some kind of artisanal, fancy salt that's blue. Doesn't matter that the meaning is a little odd. All that matters is that it's a grammatical sentence. I like the blue salt, or I like blue salt. So it looks like maybe they're in the same category, but remember, you need to keep coming up with examples until you can find a counterexample. So we repeat the process. Are there any examples you can find where the substitution doesn't work? Or how about the other way? You might start with blue and try dropping in thee. So let's do this. The blanket is blue. That's our starting grammatical sentence. We'll try dropping in thee instead, and we get the blanket is thee. That doesn't work. That's ungrammatical. The blanket is thee. If someone says that, you're going to be waiting for the following noun, right? Someone says the blanket is thee, you're going to be like, the what, right? It's ungrammatical. So in this case, the substitution made the sentence ungrammatical, so these words are in different syntactic categories. In fact, blue is part of the category we call adjectives, or adj for short, whereas thee, as we saw before, is in the category called determiners, which is abbreviated det. Now, syntactic categories don't have to just be words, and here's where it gets really interesting. Syntactic categories can actually be sequences or collections of words. So, remember, for any two sequences of words, if interchanging them makes the sentence ungrammatical, then those sequences of words are in different syntactic categories. We have the cat and a dog. Are they in the same syntactic category? Well, we start with a sentence which is grammatical, like I think the cat is cute. We drop in a dog instead, and we get I think a dog is cute. It's still grammatical. So for any sentence you can think of that has the cat, you can substitute a dog, and it's still grammatical. So those sequences of words are actually in the same syntactic category. A syntactic category that consists of a sequence of words rather than an individual word is what's called a phrase. So the cat and a dog, those sequences of words are in the same category, and the name of that category is noun phrase. They're both noun phrases, and the abbreviation for that is NP, for noun phrase. So now we can advance a better definition of syntactic category. Two words or phrases are in the same syntactic category if and only if you can interchange them in every sentence without making the sentence ungrammatical. Another example. Are the word dog and the words the cat in the same syntactic category? Well, first we find a grammatical sentence containing dog, like I have a dog. And then we see what happens if we drop in the cat instead. Try substituting the cat instead of dog. You get I have the cat. And that doesn't work. I have the cat, that is not grammatical in English. So it gets the star. The substitution makes the sentence ungrammatical, therefore these sequences of words are not in the same syntactic category. In fact, dog is a noun, an N, and the cat is a noun phrase, an NP. So there's a distinction between a noun, which is this category, and a noun phrase, which refers to this particular category, like it has a determiner and then a noun. So let's go through a few of the common syntactic categories that you're going to see in English and also in other languages. Nouns are things like cat, dog, car, water, salt. They're words that refer to entities in the world. But what defines them as syntactic categories is not what they mean. It's the fact that all the words within this category can be substituted one for the other without making a sentence ungrammatical. You have verbs like goes, went, runs, ran. Verbs are abbreviated V. You have adjectives like big, red, beautiful, angry. You have adverbs like quickly, fast, well, unfortunately. You have determiners. These are these things like a or an, the, this, that, those, my, your, things that go before nouns, in English at least. You have prepositions, things like in, of, at, from, by. You have noun phrases, which remember are often sequences of words. A noun phrase you can think of as anything that you can substitute with a pronoun. So if you have a sequence of words and you can drop in a pronoun there instead of the sequence of words, that means it's a noun phrase. So if I say like, I saw the cat, I can replace the cat with it. I saw it. It's still grammatical, so that means the cat is a noun phrase. Verb phrases are anything that you can substitute with the phrase did so, or do so, or does so. So if I say the dog saw the cat is a verb phrase. And the way you can tell is that you can drop in did so instead of saw the cat. So the dog saw the cat, drop in did so instead, you get the dog did so. It's grammatical. So that means that saw the cat is a verb phrase. So what you see is that these categories sort of come along with tests. For each category, there's typically a test that you can perform in terms of these substitutions, which will tell you is a certain sequence of words in that category or not. It's also prepositional phrases. These are things like in the park. So now we can actually give a syntactic definition for sentence. What is a sentence? What is this thing called sentence? A sentence is a phrase that can appear in this context. Sally thinks that blank. Anything that you can drop in this blank and get something grammatical is a sentence. It's a syntactic sentence. So you can say like, Sally thinks the cat is cute. That means the cat is cute is a sentence. On the other hand, you couldn't drop in the cat, right? If you just said, Sally thinks that the cat, not grammatical, right? If someone says, Sally thinks that the cat, you're like, I don't understand. So the cat is not a sentence, but the cat is cute is a sentence. So we've seen a little bit about what are the constraints on how words combine together to form sentences. We've seen that words are drawn from these categories. But what we're going to talk about now is how we can use those categories to describe those constraints on how we form grammatical sentences. So the goal of syntax as a field of study is to figure out what are the rules that make some combinations of words grammatical and others ungrammatical. There are two kinds of constraints on words and phrases in sentences. Two kinds of constraints. There's what's called co-occurrence constraints. This is when you have one word somewhere in a sentence and that requires you must also have some other word in the sentence. And there's what's called word order constraints. That means that words have to be placed in a certain order in order for the sentence to be grammatical. So we'll take these in turn. Co-occurrence constraints are things like this. This is a grammatical sentence. Sally hasn't read the book. How about this? Sally hasn't read the. Well, it's ungrammatical, and it gets the star. And the reason it's ungrammatical is because of a co-occurrence constraint. If you have a determiner like the, it has to be followed by a noun, like book. But if you get the without the following noun, it's ungrammatical. That's a co-occurrence constraint. The presence of the determiner requires the presence of a noun following it. How about this? Sally hasn't read this book. Well, this is also ungrammatical. This doesn't work either. And that's because within a noun phrase, you can only have one determiner. You can't have multiple determiners like the and this inside the noun phrase. That's another co-occurrence constraint. How about this? Sally hasn't read 3 book. Ungrammatical, right? And that's because if you have a word like 3, which indicates plurality, then the following noun has to be in the plural form. It can't be in the singular form like book. That's another kind of co-occurrence constraint. You could, on the other hand, say Sally hasn't read 3 books. That's grammatical. And that's because the numeral 3 requires a plural noun after it in English, and 3 books, that has the plural noun, it's okay. So sometimes a word requires the presence of some other word. Like if I say Sally hasn't read the book, I can't just truncate it and say Sally hasn't read the. This shows that a determiner requires a following noun. We notice that I've expressed this in terms of the syntactic categories det and en. Sometimes also a word rules out the presence of another word. So I can say like Sally hasn't read this book. Now I can't say that actually, that's ungrammatical. That means that if you have a determiner inside a noun phrase, then that rules out other determiners. Sometimes also a word requires another word to be in a particular morphological form. So Sally hasn't read 3 book doesn't work. Sally hasn't read 3 books works. What we see is that a number word, which is a numeral category num, requires a plural noun which has category plural n. Now word order constraints are the second type of syntactic constraint. These are things like this. So Sally hasn't read the book is grammatical, it's fine. How about this? Sally hasn't read book the. Well, I've satisfied the co-occurrence constraint. So there's a noun here and there's a determiner, but they're in the wrong order. In English, the determiner has to go before the noun. It's different in other languages, but in English, the determiner always has to go before the noun. So it would be ungrammatical, it would be incomprehensible to say Sally hasn't read book the. If you said that, an English speaker would not understand what you mean. Sally saw the book, again, is okay. Saw Sally the book, that doesn't work. So I've moved the verb to the beginning here, and we don't do that in English. That violates a word order rule of English. That's ungrammatical. Or something like Sally the book saw. Here I've moved the verb to the end. Again, that's ungrammatical. We see that the order of word matters. So certain words are required to go before other words. Like Sally read the book, that's okay. Sally read book the, that's not okay because the determiner has to go before the noun. Sally saw the book is okay, but saw Sally the book is not. That shows that the subject of a verb has to go before the verb. Certain words are required to go after other words. Like Sally saw the book is okay. The noun phrase the book has to go after the verb saw. But if I move that verb phrase before the verb, then I would get Sally the book saw, and that's not grammatical English. So the object of a verb has to go after the verb. Overall, English has a word order that we would describe as subject, verb, object. So the subject of a verb goes before the verb, then you have the verb, and then after it you have the object, as in Sally read the book.